She was a black woman, alone, in a foreign city, and armed men were hunting her through the streets of Seoul. She had no weapons, no connections, no money to disappear. All she had was a camera around her neck and photographs she never meant to take. Photographs that could destroy some of the most powerful men in South Korea. She had nowhere to run, until she called the one number she swore she would never dial. His name moved through Seoul's criminal underworld like a warning. Yeon Jisoo, the ghost. A Korean mafia boss with dragon tattoos climbing up his neck and eyes cold enough to make grown men forget how to speak. He controlled territories, ports, politicians. He had never protected anyone out of anything other than strategy. Until her. When the rival clan sent a message, threatening her life, threatening everyone she loved, he didn't negotiate. He didn't hesitate. He walked into that warehouse with 6 men against 12, and he looked at the man who dared to threaten what was his with a voice so quiet it was terrifying. And he said something that nobody in that room would ever forget. But what she had been building in secret, what she had photographed without even knowing it, that was about to change everything. Not just for the two of them, for an entire city that thought it was safe from the truth. He went to war for her. She never asked him to. And neither of them walked away from it the same. Before we begin the story, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is there. If stories about karma, love, and hidden truths resonate with you, be sure to subscribe to the channel. The port of Incheon never truly slept. Even past midnight, when the last of the legitimate workers had clocked out and gone home to their families, the docks breathed with a different kind of life. The slow, deliberate movement of men who preferred the dark, the low hum of machinery that no customs officer had inspected in years. The occasional flicker of a cigarette being lit and immediately cupped against the salt wind coming off the Yellow Sea. It was the kind of place that swallowed sounds. Conversations that happened between those shipping containers never quite made it into the open air. And that, of course, was precisely the point. Jade Collins had been in Seoul for 87 days when she first walked into that port with her cannon hanging around her neck and her camo backpack riding low on her shoulders. She was not naive. She had photographed favelas in Rio, displacement camps on the Thai-Myanmar border, fishing communities in Lagos where the men went out at dawn and sometimes did not come back. She knew how to read a room, and she knew how to read a street. What she did not know, what no one had told her, because no one who knew would have dared say it aloud, was that the Eastern Galbois, the warehouse buildings that sat furthest from the main dock gates, were not abandoned. They simply looked that way, on purpose. She had been following an elderly fisherman named Mr. Huang for 3 days. He was 71 years old, bow-legged, with hands so calloused they looked carved from driftwood. He slept between shifts in whatever dry corner he could find, ate from a single metal container his daughter packed for him each morning, and had not been home before sunrise in 6 months. He was exactly the kind of person Jade's work existed to document. The invisible machinery behind the economy, the human cost of a port that generated billions, while the men who actually worked it survived on the margins. Mr. Huang had trusted her. That was the thing that would stay with her longest in the weeks that followed. He had trusted her, and she had followed him, and neither of them had known what was waiting on the other side of that rusted door. She pushed it open with her shoulder the way she always did with old doors, one firm press, expecting resistance, then the slow give of hinges that hadn't been oiled in years. The smell hit her first. Not fish, not salt water, something chemical, industrial. And underneath it, beneath the sharp surface of it, the particular smell of money being moved in ways that had nothing to do with banks. The room was lit by 4 standing lamps positioned with the careful precision of people who did not want light spilling under doors. There were 12 men visible from where she stood. Tables, crates, and on the tables, between maps and phones and what appeared to be manifests, weapons arranged with the casual familiarity of tools in a workshop. The flash went off before her brain caught up to her finger. It was reflex. Pure photographic reflex. The kind that had given her the best shots of her career and, more than once, the worst moments of her life. The burst of white light filled the room for less than a second. The silence that followed lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then every man in the room turned toward the door. Jade ran. She did not look back. She did not think. Her body made every decision her mind was too fractured to form. Left around the first container, right along the chain-link fence. Drop the shoulder. Push through the gap where the corrugated metal had bent away from the post. She lost a shoe somewhere on the gravel between the fence and her bicycle, and she did not stop to find it. She rode back through Incheon in the dark with one bare foot and her heart hammering so loud she could not hear the traffic. Back at the hostel, she locked the door of her room, sat on the edge of the bed, and did not move for 11 minutes. She knew exactly how long because she watched the clock on her phone without blinking. Then she plugged the SD card into her laptop and looked at what she had taken. She had 43 frames from that night. 31 were motion blur, darkness, the ground rushing past as she ran. 12 were from inside the warehouse. And of those 12, 6 were clear enough to matter. Clear enough to show faces. Clear enough to show what was on those tables. Clear enough that she sat back in her chair and felt the specific, particular weight of having photographed something that was now going to follow her, whether she wanted it to or not. She did not know the name Baek Sung-min. She did not know the Hongryong clan, or the port war that had been building for 2 years between rival organizations for control of the Incheon shipping routes. She did not know that one of the faces in her photographs belonged to a man who had not been photographed in 11 years, and who had, in that time, accumulated the kind of power that made problems disappear with a single phone call. She knew none of this. What she knew was that she was a 28-year-old freelance photographer from Atlanta, Georgia, alone in a foreign city, with a laptop full of evidence she had not asked for. She backed up the files to 2 encrypted cloud drives, the way she always did with sensitive material. She ate a granola bar from her bag. She lay down on top of the covers without changing her clothes and stared at the water stain on the ceiling of her hostel room until her body finally decided it was safe enough to sleep. 3 days passed. 3 days of editing other photographs, answering emails, riding her bicycle to less dangerous parts of the port to work on the story she had actually come to tell. Mr. Huang's story. The fisherman's story. The story of men who worked themselves to nothing for a port city that did not know their names. On the morning of the 4th day, she came downstairs to find the hostel receptionist speaking quietly to 2 men she had never seen before. They were dressed too well for the neighborhood. One of them was holding a photograph on his phone, and she could not see the screen clearly from the staircase, but she did not need to. She went back upstairs. She packed her bag in 4 minutes. She went out the window. She found a 24-hour cafe in Mapo, far from Incheon, far from her hostel, far from anything she recognized. She ordered coffee she did not taste and opened her laptop and sat with the weight of a decision she did not know how to make. Delete everything and go home. Or send it all to her editor in Atlanta and watch whatever happened next happen from a distance. She was still sitting there, still undecided, when the door opened and a man in a black suit walked in. He was tall. He moved through the half-empty cafe with the particular stillness of someone who had learned a long time ago that the less space you take up, the more people underestimate you. He sat at the table beside hers without looking at her. He ordered coffee with a single word and a gesture. And then he wrapped both hands around the cup when it came, and she saw, before she saw anything else about him, that his hands were trembling. Not with fear. She had photographed enough people in enough situations to know the difference between fear and fury that had nowhere to go. His hands were trembling the way a held breath trembles. The way something trembles when it is being kept from moving by an act of pure will. She lifted her camera before she thought about it. The reflex again. The same one that had gotten her into all of this. His voice came quietly, without him turning to look at her. No. She lowered the camera. Sorry. You just have a face that tells a story. He turned then, and he looked at her the way very few people had ever looked at her. Not past her, not through her, not at the camera instead of her face. Directly at her, with the full weight of attention that most people reserved for threats. What story? He said. She held his gaze. Someone died, she said. And you haven't decided what to do about it yet. The silence between them had texture. It was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had both learned, in very different ways, that words were expensive and most people spent them carelessly. You're too perceptive, he said finally, for someone alone in Seoul at 3 a.m. And you're too dangerous, she said, for a regular coffee shop. So I guess we're even. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. Something quieter than a smile and more honest. Neither of them offered a name. Neither of them asked. They sat in that cafe for 2 hours while Seoul moved invisibly outside the windows. And when Jade finally stood to leave, she looked back once from the doorway. He was still watching the door she had just walked through. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself a lot of things in the days that followed that turned out not to be true. The card he had left on the table. No name, no title. Just a number and a small embossed symbol she didn't recognize, something between a wave and a blade, sat at the bottom of her backpack for 2 days before she touched it again. She had moved hostels twice. The first move was practical. The second was fear dressed up as practicality, which she recognized but did not fight. She was staying now in a narrow room above a laundromat in Hongdae, paying cash, using the hostel Wi-Fi from the stairwell because she didn't want to give her name at the front desk. Her laptop stayed in her bag. The SD card stayed around her neck on the same cord as her camera, which was the kind of decision that made perfect sense and no sense at all simultaneously. On the second morning, she was eating instant ramen at the window when a man appeared at the corner of the street below and stood there without moving for 4 minutes. He wasn't looking at her window. He wasn't looking at anything in particular. He was simply present in the way that certain people are present, occupying space with intention, waiting for something to confirm itself. She watched him from behind the curtain with a spoonful of broth halfway to her mouth. He left without looking up. She put down the spoon and did not finish eating. That afternoon, she called her editor in Atlanta. Maya was 53 years old, had been a field journalist for 20 years before moving into editing, and had the particular quality of listening without interrupting that made people tell her more than they intended to. Jade told her about the warehouse. She told her about the photographs. She did not tell her about the man in the cafe, because she couldn't explain that part in a way that would make sense to someone who hadn't been there. Maya was quiet for a long moment after Jade finished. How clear are the images? Clear enough? Clear enough to identify? Yes. Another silence. Then, Jade, this is the kind of material that I know what it is. Do you have somewhere safe to be? And that was the question that broke something open in her chest, because the honest answer was no. and she had been pretending otherwise for 4 days, and hearing someone else ask it out loud made the pretending impossible. She hung up the call. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed with the card in her hand. The embossed symbol caught the light from the window. That shape between a wave and a blade, repeated twice, overlapping. She had photographed enough to know it meant something specific to someone. She just didn't know what. She dialed the number. It rang once. "I was wondering," said the voice on the other end, calm and low and entirely unsurprised, "when you would call." The 2 men he sent arrived in 11 minutes. They were polite in the particular way of people who are dangerous enough that politeness costs them nothing. Unhurried, quiet, holding no visible weapons, offering no explanation. One of them held the car door open for her. She got in because she had already decided, and because getting in felt safer than every other option she had. The apartment was on the 31st floor of a building in Yongsan that had no visible sign outside and a lobby that looked like it belonged to an architecture firm. The elevator required a key. The hallway on his floor was silent in the way that expensive silence is. Not empty, but controlled. Every sound absorbed before it could travel. The apartment itself stopped her at the threshold. She had been in a lot of spaces in her work. Government offices and crumbling buildings, community centers held together by donated furniture, fishing cooperatives that smelled of salt and old rope. She had also been in the homes of people with money, which tended to announce themselves loudly. Art chosen to impress, furniture chosen to signal, every surface a statement about the owner's net worth and taste. This was not that. The apartment was almost bare. Long windows ran the full length of the western wall, and beyond them, souls spread out in every direction, lit and alive and completely indifferent. The furniture was minimal and dark. There were books, more books than she expected, stacked on shelves that ran floor to ceiling along one wall, and she could see from across the room that they were read, not displayed. Spines cracked, margins marked. On the narrow balcony, visible through the glass, a single cactus sat in a clay pot. Jisoo was standing at the window with his back to her when she came in. He did not turn immediately. She got the sense that this was not rudeness. It was simply how he occupied a room, with his back to the center of it, watching what was outside while he spoke to what was behind him. "Why did you call me?" She set her backpack down on the floor near the door. Not all the way in. Not committed. "Because you're the only dangerous man I've met who didn't look at me like I was a problem to be solved." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you know who I am?" "No, but I know what you are. And you still called." "I'd rather deal with the devil I've already seen," she said, "than the one hunting me in the streets." He turned then. In the full light of the apartment, she could see him clearly for the first time. The precise architecture of his face, the way the tattoos climbed from his collar up the right side of his neck and disappeared behind his ear. The dark eyes that moved over her with the kind of assessment that was not threatening, but was absolute. He saw her. All of her. The damp hem of her jeans from the rain outside, the way she was holding her camera strap with one hand, even though the camera was in her bag. The fact that she had positioned herself 3 feet from the door. 3 days, he said. You stay here while I assess the situation. After that, you leave Seoul and never come back. She looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said. The 3 days became a week, and neither of them spoke directly about why. She told herself it was practical. The situation had not resolved. His people were still moving information, tracking movements, building a picture of how badly the Hongmyong wanted the card and what they were willing to do about it. Until that picture was complete, leaving was a risk she couldn't calculate. This was true. It was also not the whole truth, and she was honest enough with herself, in the quiet hours, to know the difference. She photographed the apartment the way she photographed everywhere she stayed for more than 2 days. Not with the intention of publishing, just as a way of seeing. The books were in Korean, Japanese, and English, and the English ones were mostly history. Military history, economic history, the kind of history that was interested in systems rather than individuals. The margins were dense with notes in a handwriting that was small and extremely controlled. The cactus on the balcony was a golden barrel variety, old enough to have developed its shape properly, and he watered it every morning at the same time with the focused attention of someone performing a ritual. He left early and came back late, and when he came back, there was always a period of perhaps 20 minutes where he stood at the window in the dark before he turned any lights on. She learned not to speak during those 20 minutes. She was not sure he knew she had learned this. They began, without discussing it, to share the space in the evenings. He would review documents at the long table near the kitchen. She would edit photographs at the other end. The silence between them was the productive kind. Not absence of communication, but a mutual agreement that presence was enough, that not everything needed to be filled in. On the 5th night, she was sitting on the kitchen floor at 2 a.m. when he found her. She had not heard him come in. She had been sitting there for a while, she wasn't sure how long, with her back against the cabinet and her knees drawn up and her camera in her lap. Not crying exactly, but in the vicinity of it. In that particular state where the body has decided something and the mind is still arguing. He didn't ask. He filled the kettle and set it on the stove and got 2 cups from the cabinet above her head and waited for the water to boil. Then he made the tea, a Coreano barley tea she had never tasted before, with a smell like toasted grain and something faintly sweet underneath. And he set 1 cup on the floor beside her and took the other to the opposite side of the counter and sat. Not close, not far. She held the cup in both hands and let the warmth move through her palms and didn't say anything for a long time. Then she told him about her sister. She told him about the call she hadn't answered, about being in the middle of photographing a protest outside a government building in Accra and feeling her phone vibrate in her vest pocket and making the decision, in a fraction of a second, to leave it. About what she found when she finally looked at the screen 40 minutes later. About the specific way that kind of guilt works. Not loud, not dramatic, but structural, like something load-bearing had been removed from inside her and everything else had shifted to compensate. "You document other people's suffering," he said quietly when she finished, "because you don't know what to do with your own." She looked at him across the kitchen. "I understand that," he said. He was looking at the cup in his hands. "I controlled everything around me because I could never control anything inside." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, Seoul moved and breathed and did not care, the way cities never care, which is both their cruelty and their mercy. She reached across the counter and put her hand over his. He looked down at her hand. He did not move. And in that stillness, in that kitchen, at 2 a.m. with the barley tea going cold in their cups, something shifted between them that could not be unshifted. Not a kiss, not a declaration. Something quieter and more permanent than either. The specific moment when 2 people who have both learned to need nothing realize, with a feeling that is equal parts relief and terror, that they have started to need each other. Neither of them said so. They didn't have to. She found the envelope on a Tuesday morning. He had left before dawn, as he always did, with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent decades making his departures invisible. She had heard him, not the door. He never let the door make noise. but the particular shift in the apartment's atmosphere that happened when he was gone. The way the space exhaled slightly, as if it too had been holding something in while he was present. She had lain still for a few minutes after, listening to the city below, and then gotten up and made coffee and stood at the window, watching Seoul arrange itself into daytime. The building's concierge had slid the envelope under the apartment door sometime in the night. It was plain white. No return address. Her name written on the front in English, which meant it was meant specifically for her. Not for him, not for the apartment, not for whoever might have been staying there. For her, Jade Collins. Which meant someone knew she was there, knew her name, and had chosen to reach her through the building's front desk rather than through any of the more direct methods available to people who operated the way the Homgryong operated. That choice was deliberate. She understood, as she stood holding the envelope in the gray morning light, that the choice was a message in itself. Not a threat delivered through force, but a demonstration. We know where you are. We know who you are. We can reach you quietly, which means we can reach you any way we choose. She opened it. The note inside was short. Printed, not handwritten, in clean English with no grammatical errors, which meant either a native speaker or someone who had taken care. You cannot be protected forever. When he looks away, you will learn what happens to people who know too much. Deliver the card, or your editor in Atlanta will receive a visit. She read it twice. Then she folded it along its original crease and put it in the inside pocket of her backpack, against the lining, behind the small zippered compartment where she kept her extra SD cards and her emergency cash. She did not tell him. This was the decision. Quiet, immediate, made before she had fully consciously processed making it. That would cost her more than she anticipated. Not because it was wrong, exactly. She had reasons. She told herself the reasons were good. She did not want to be the variable that escalated a war between two criminal organizations. She did not want the weight of that on top of everything else she was already carrying. She was already the reason his people were on alert, already the reason he was spending resources and attention on something that had nothing to do with his actual world. Adding this felt like adding mass to something already straining at its load-bearing points. What she did instead was call Maya. She went to the balcony, door mostly closed, and she told Maya to pull back from the project entirely. Delete the backup copies. Don't talk to the external contact. Don't publish anything. Walk away from it and don't leave a trail. Maya was silent for a moment that stretched in a way that told Jade exactly what was coming before it came. Jade. Maya. The external contact already has the files. The morning air off the Han River was cold against her face. She gripped the balcony railing with her free hand and looked at the water below. That wide gray ribbon of river moving through the city with the complete indifference of things that have been moving for longer than any of the buildings around them. When? 3 days ago. Standard protocol for sensitive material. I sent it as soon as you told me what you had. I thought you knew that was the process. She did know. She had known when she called Maya and described the photographs. She had known, and she had called anyway, because she needed to tell someone. And she had let herself pretend that knowing and the files being distributed were not the same thing. Can you get it back? Not easily. And honestly, Jade. Maya's voice had the particular gentleness of someone delivering information they know will not be received well. Maybe not at all. He's already started cross-referencing. She ended the call. She stood on the balcony for a long time with the cold coming off the river and the city spreading out in every direction, enormous and alive, and completely unaware of the specific way things were unraveling inside this particular apartment on this particular morning. She went back inside and sat down at the table and opened her laptop and stared at the screen without seeing it. She had tried to manage this alone. She had tried to protect him from a complication she had caused, and in doing so, she had made the complication significantly worse. And she had done it without giving him the information he needed to operate, which was not protection. Which was, she understood now with the particular clarity of hindsight, the opposite of protection. She was still sitting there when she heard the elevator. He came through the door at 6 p.m, which was earlier than usual, and she knew from the way he moved across the threshold, not the careful, controlled stillness of his normal return, but something slightly accelerated, the energy of a man whose information had just changed, that he already knew. She watched him cross the room. He stopped at the kitchen counter, his back to her, and placed both hands flat on the surface. She had been around enough volatile people. "You tried to handle it yourself," he said. It was not a question. His voice was level. That was worse than anger. She had been around enough volatile people in her life to know that the ones who went quiet when something went wrong were the ones you needed to watch most carefully. Not because they were more dangerous, though often they were, but because the quiet meant the thing was real to them. Anger was frequently performance. Silence was not. "I didn't want to be the reason for a war," she said. "It's already too late for that." He turned. He looked at her across the apartment with those dark eyes that never seemed to blink enough. "But I need you to understand something, Jade." It was the first time he had said her name. She heard it land differently than any of the other words he had spoken to her. Not harder, but deeper, like something that had been aimed more carefully. He walked toward her. He stopped less than a meter away and looked at her with an expression that was not anger, and was not softness, and was not anything she had a clean word for. Something that lived in the precise territory between professionalism and its complete collapse. "I am not protecting you because you have something they want," he said. "I am protecting you because—" He stopped. He breathed once, slowly, the breath of a man who has spent his entire adult life editing himself and is now, in this moment, choosing not to. "Because apparently I am still capable of caring about something. And that is inconvenient, and it is dangerous. And it changes nothing about what I am going to do." She held his gaze. Her heart was doing something her face was carefully not showing. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Finish it," he said. He made 3 calls that night. She did not hear the content of them. He went to his study, which she had never been inside, and the door was thick. But she heard the duration and the tone. That low, controlled voice that never raised itself and never needed to. The calls were short, each one shorter than the last, the way conversations get shorter as authority increases and explanations become unnecessary. When he came out, he poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey and stood at the window and drank it without sitting down. She watched him from the couch, with her knees pulled up and her camera in her lap. Not shooting, just holding, the familiar weight of it against her palms. "Sungmin will agree to a meeting," he said, still facing the window. "How do you know?" "Because I know something he doesn't know I know." He set the glass down on the windowsill. "And because men like Sungmin always prefer to believe they are negotiating when they are actually surrendering. It protects their self-image." She looked at his profile against the city light. The line of his jaw. The tattoos visible above the collar. The single strand of hair that had come loose from its place and which he had not moved because he was thinking about something else entirely. "You've done this before," she said. "Negotiated with people who thought they had leverage they didn't have. Many times. Does it always work?" He was quiet for a moment. It works when the other person is more afraid of losing what they have than they are committed to taking what they want. He turned from the window and looked at her. Sungmin is afraid. He has been afraid for a long time. Fear makes people manageable. And you? She said before she could stop herself. Are you afraid of anything? The question sat in the air between them. He looked at her with that full-weight attention, the kind that saw everything and gave almost nothing back. Yes, he said simply. She waited. He did not elaborate, but his eyes moved to her face and stayed there, and she understood. In the way that she understood most true things, through image rather than language, through what she could see rather than what was said, exactly what he meant. She looked down at the camera in her hands. She turned it once, slowly, the way she did when she was thinking. Then she did something she had not planned to do. She opened her laptop and went to the encrypted folder where the warehouse photographs lived and began to look through them again. Not as evidence, not as journalism, but as a puzzle she had been ignoring because the solving of it scared her. She had been inside that world, however briefly. She had been in the galpao with the maps and the crates and the manifests. She had seen more than faces. She had seen documents. She had seen shipping routes marked on printed maps with the casual permanence of things that had been operating the same way for a long time. She had been in this apartment for more than a week, surrounded by a man who understood that world in its entirety. And she had a mind trained to find the story inside the image, to see what was actually there rather than what the surface suggested. She began to work. She worked quietly, methodically, the way she always worked. Moving through the frames one by one, pulling details, cross-referencing what she could see against what she knew, building the picture the way she built every story, from the edges inward. He left her to it. He understood, she thought, the particular silence required for that kind of scene. By midnight, she had found something. Not in the warehouse photographs. In the weeks of work she had done before the warehouse. The port documentation, the fishermen, the shipping records she had photographed on bulletin boards and loading dock walls, because they gave context to the workers' stories. She had not known what she was looking at then. She knew now. A shipping fund. A set of investor names that appeared in the margins of documents she had photographed without understanding. 3 names that cross-referenced against public records. Records she could access from her laptop without alerting anyone, to political figures. Senior political figures. The kind whose names appeared in the kind of news stories that very quietly disappeared before they could accumulate momentum. She had not photographed the Hongryong by accident. She had photographed the edge of something much larger, and the Hongryong had simply been standing in the frame. She sat back in her chair. The apartment was quiet. "Show you something," she said. She turned the laptop to face him. He crossed the room without hurrying and stood behind her left shoulder and looked at the screen. She had arranged the images in sequence. The bulletin board photographs first, then the shipping manifests, then the cross-referenced names laid out in a document she had built over the last 2 hours, clean and organized, the way she organized every story before she decided what to do with it. She had drawn the connections in a simple diagram at the bottom of the page. 3 columns: names, funds, dates. He was silent for a long time. She could feel him reading. Not skimming, reading, the way he did everything, with complete attention and without performance. She had learned in the past week that he never pretended to have processed something faster than he had. He took the time he needed, and he did not apologize for it. "Where did you get the manifest photographs?" he said finally. "Loading dock bulletin boards. The eastern docks mostly. I photographed everything that gave context to the workers' schedules. I was building a picture of their daily environment. I didn't know what I was looking at." And these names. He leaned slightly closer to the screen. You cross-reference these yourself. Public business registry. It took about 40 minutes once I knew what to look for. He straightened up. He moved to the window and stood there with his hands in his pockets, which she had come to understand was his thinking position. Not agitated, not restless, simply still in the way that a mind working very fast makes the body very quiet. This is not just about the port, he said. No. This connects to the Infrastructure Investment Committee. It was not a question. The one that approved the Eastern Dock expansion 3 years ago. The dates align. He turned from the window and looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not quite surprise, because she suspected genuine surprise was something he had trained out of himself over years of operating in a world where being surprised meant being unprepared. But something adjacent to it. The recognition of a variable he had not accounted for. You came here to photograph fishermen, he said. Yes. And you built, without knowing it, a documentary record of the financial architecture behind one of the largest port corruption networks in South Korea. She held his gaze. Apparently. He was quiet again. Then something moved across his face that was the closest thing to dark humor she had seen from him. Not a smile exactly, but the ghost of one. The suggestion that somewhere underneath the control, there was a man who appreciated irony. Jade, he said. Yes? I need you to trust me with what you've built here. She looked at him for a long moment, at the tattoos and the dark eyes, and the careful hands, and the cactus on the balcony that he watered every morning without fail. At the man who had sat across a kitchen counter from her at 2 a.m. and said, I understand that, in a voice that meant he actually did. Okay, she said, and I need you to do one more thing. What? Whatever you're planning to do with those files, the backup copies you sent somewhere that you haven't told me about, I need you to set a timer on it. Not delete it. Just hold it. She stared at him. How did you? Because it's what I would have done, he said simply. And because you're not someone who leaves herself without an exit. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, 72 hours. 2 journalists. Different outlets. If I don't check in, everything publishes automatically. He nodded once, slowly. The nod of a man filing information rather than reacting to it. Good, he said. Keep it. He made the call to Baek Sung-min at 1 a.m. She did not hear the conversation. She sat on the balcony with the cold coming off the river and the city spread out below her, brilliant and indifferent, and she held her camera without shooting anything and waited. The call lasted 6 minutes. When he came to the balcony door, she could read nothing from his face, which she had come to understand meant that things had gone the way he intended. Tomorrow night, he said. The neutral warehouse, Eastport. He agreed. He thinks he's negotiating. He leaned against the doorframe and looked at her. He thinks I've been weakened by this. By you. Have you? The question landed in the air between them. He looked at her steadily. Yes, he said, but not in the way he thinks. She looked at him for a long moment. The city moved below them. The river moved. Everything moved except the two of them, standing on opposite sides of a threshold, which felt, she thought, like an accurate representation of where they had been for a week. Close enough to feel the warmth, careful enough not to cross. She lifted the camera. He did not say no this time. The shutter opened and closed in a fraction of a second. The image locked itself into the card around her neck. Him in the doorway, the city behind him, the expression on his face that was not quite guarded, and not quite open, but something precisely between the two, something true. He looked at her after, not at the camera, at her. "Get some sleep," he said quietly. "Tomorrow is mine to handle." "And if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong." That's not an answer. He considered her for a moment. "If something goes wrong," he said, "the 72 hours begin the moment you stop hearing from me. You get out of this building, you go to your embassy, and you do not look back." She wanted to argue. She did not argue. She nodded once, and he accepted the nod. And they stood there for a moment longer than was necessary before he went back inside and she turned back to the river. She did not sleep for a long time. The warehouse was the same and not the same. In the dark, with the port quiet around it and the yellow sea moving somewhere beyond the lights, the eastern galpao looked like every other industrial structure on the waterfront. Enormous, rusted, patient in the way that metal and concrete are patient, indifferent to what happened inside them. But she had been inside one like it not long ago, with her heart hammering and her feet skidding on gravel. And her body remembered, even if the building did not. She was not supposed to be there. He had been explicit about that, and she had agreed. And she had meant the agreement when she made it. She had come anyway. Not inside. She had positioned herself on the roof of a storage unit 40 meters from the warehouse entrance, with her camera and her longest lens, and the specific, focused calm that came over her when she was working. When the situation became image, and image became something she could control, something she could frame and hold and see clearly. She was not there to intervene. She was there because she needed to see. Sungmin arrived at 9 with 12 men. She counted them through the lens, faces sharp in the sodium light from the dock lamps. Sungmin himself was exactly as she imagined him from the world he moved in. Heavy, deliberate, wearing his power the way certain men did, as mass rather than precision, as volume rather than weight. The rings on his fingers caught the light. The scar below his left eye was a pale line against darker skin. Jisoo arrived 8 minutes later with 6 men. She watched Sungmin's posture shift when he counted. The small adjustment of a man who has just calculated an advantage and feels the comfort of it settle into his shoulders. She had photographed that posture before, in negotiating rooms, in courtrooms, in every space where human beings tried to establish dominance before words were even exchanged. She had also photographed what happened when the calculation was wrong. She could not hear what was said inside. She did not need to. She could see it through the high windows that ran along the warehouse's upper walls, shapes moving, the geometry of a conversation changing, the particular stillness that fell over a room when something unexpected entered it. She saw the moment Jisoo placed the tablet on the table. She saw Sungmin's posture change, the shoulders that had settled in comfortable confidence, now something different, something smaller. She saw the calculation in the room shift the way weather shifts, the pressure dropping before the change is visible in the sky. She shot continuously, frame after frame, the lens pulling detail from the lit windows, the faces at the threshold when the warehouse door opened briefly, the body language of men whose certainty was collapsing. And then she saw the young man. He was perhaps 25. He had positioned himself near the exit, separate from the main cluster of Sungmin's men. And there was something in his posture, a coiled readiness, a jaw set too hard, the energy of someone who had decided something and was waiting for the moment to act on it, that she recognized with her whole body before her mind caught up. She lowered the camera for a fraction of a second, raised it again. The young man stepped forward, placing himself between Jisoo and the door. She could not hear the words. She saw the stillness that followed them. She saw Jisoo stop completely. Not freeze, which implied surprise, but stop, the way a mechanism stops when the correct input is received and it is processing the appropriate response. She saw him button the second button of his jacket, slowly, with the deliberate patience of a man who understood that the speed at which you respond to a threat communicates more than the response itself. She saw him turn. She could not hear what he said, but she saw every man in that warehouse hear it. She saw it move through the room the way sound moves through water. Not along the surface, but through the whole medium, reaching every part of it at once. She saw the young man taken by Sungmin's own people. She saw Sungmin's mouth move in something she would have called an apology if she had thought him capable of one. She saw Jisoo accept it with a single nod, the nod of a man to whom apologies were information rather than comfort. Noted, filed, given exactly the weight they deserved and no more. Then she saw him walk out. She was back in the apartment before him. She had not rushed. She had packed her lens, descended from the storage roof with careful footing, walked back through the port at the pace of someone who belonged there, which was the only pace that worked in spaces like that. She had made coffee when she got in. She was sitting on the balcony with it when she heard the elevator. He came through the door and crossed the apartment and came to the balcony and stood in the doorway. He looked at her. He looked at the camera in her lap. He looked at her face. "You were there," he said. "Yes." A silence. Not the comfortable kind. Not the difficult kind either. Something more specific. The silence of two people who have reached the place where pretending is no longer available to them. "You saw?" "Yes." He sat down beside her, not across from her the way he sat in the kitchen the night she told him about her sister. Beside her. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the cold coming off the river. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "It's done," he said finally. "I know." "He'll hold to it. He has no other option." "I know." She paused. "I found something else in the photographs while I was up there." She lifted the camera. "I got faces at the threshold. 2 of the men with Sungmin. I've seen them in my port documentation. Not as Hong-young, as contractors for the investment fund." He looked at her steadily. "That's the connection you were missing," she said. "Between the port operation and the political layer. The same men moving between both. You shot them tonight. Clean frames, identifiable." He was quiet for a moment that had the quality of something being decided. "When you leave," he said, "those photographs go with you." "I know." "And the story gets told." "That was always going to happen," she said. "The only question was how." He looked at her. "You came here to photograph fishermen." "I did." "And instead I photographed everything else." She looked at him. "That's usually how it works. You go looking for one story and you find the one that was there all along." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then, very quietly, "When is your flight?" "Tomorrow night." He nodded. He looked at the river. She looked at the river. Seoul moved below them in its enormous, indifferent, magnificent way. Lit in every direction, alive in every direction, full of stories that were happening right now to people who did not yet know what they were inside of. "There's something I want to show you," she said. She opened the laptop and turned it toward him. It was the photograph from the cafe. The first night. Him in profile, the cup in trembling hands. The low amber light, the tattoos above the collar, and in his eyes. Not coldness. Not the controlled surface that the world saw and stopped looking past. Something underneath it. Something that had been there all along for anyone willing to look. He looked at it for a long time. "I never published it," she said. "I'm not going to." "Why?" She held his gaze. "Because some stories aren't for the world," she said. "They're just yours." He looked at the photograph again, and she watched something happen in his face that she had not seen happen before. Not a breaking, not a collapse, but a yielding. The specific, quiet yielding of a structure that has been holding against pressure for so long it has forgotten what it feels like to stop. He had been sold by his own father at 11 years old. He had built a world out of control because control was the only thing that had ever protected him. He had spent 30 years being used, being feared, being needed, being obeyed. And in none of it had he been chosen. Simply chosen. For himself. For what he actually was rather than what he could do or what he represented. Until a woman with a camera and a camo backpack and a grief she carried like a second body had sat across from him in a cafe at 3 a.m. and looked at him. Really looked. And seen something worth keeping. "Jade," he said. "I know," she said. And she did. She knew what he was not going to say, and she knew why he wasn't going to say it. And she knew that the not saying was its own kind of saying, the truest kind, the kind that didn't require words because words were always slightly less accurate than the truth they were trying to carry. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He did not move away. His hand came to rest against hers on the armrest of the chair, and he did not move it. They stayed like that while Seoul turned below them, and the river moved, and the sky began, very slowly, to change at its eastern edge. That first, almost imperceptible lightning that comes before the light itself, the moment the night concedes before anyone can prove it has. "We still have the morning," he said. "Yes," she said. "We do." The sun came up over Seoul and found them there. 2 people on a balcony above the Han River, watching the city they were both leaving. Him to the world he had built from nothing and could not walk away from. Her to the story she had come to tell and found larger than she knew. Watching it together, one last time, in the particular silence of people who have said everything that matters and are now simply present inside it. She did not photograph the sunrise. Some moments, she had learned, were not for keeping. They were just for being inside, fully and without the distance of a lens, without the protective frame of a viewfinder between yourself and the thing you were feeling. She left the camera on the table and watched the morning come with her own eyes. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was, she thought, feeling the warmth of him beside her and the cold of the river air and the first pale gold touching the tops of the buildings. The most honest photograph she had never taken. If this story moved you, take a moment and really think about this. Have you ever been in a place so foreign, so dangerous, so completely alone, that the only person you could trust was the last person anyone would expect? Have you ever protected someone, or been protected by someone, not because it was smart, not because it was safe, but simply because something inside you refused to look away? And here is the hardest question of all. Have you ever let someone see the real you? Not the face you show the world, but the version underneath, the one that's still carrying everything it was never allowed to put down. And watch them choose to stay anyway? Tell us your story in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories about love, courage, and the kind of truth that changes people forever, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.